One, thanks for joining. We're live on the Insurance House. We have a very special guest today. Gwen Larkin's joining us from Maryland. Hi, Gwen. How are you?
I'm good, Mike. How are you?
I'm excellent. Thanks for taking the time. I know you're busy and you run a department of many people, so thank you for taking time out of your busy day to join us.
No, no problem. Thank you for having me.
So, Gwen is the Enterprise Claims Technical Consulting Director with American Family Insurance, and she has many, many years in the industry. Gwen, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background before we get started?
Sure. So, as Mike said, I've been in the industry for nearly 20 years. Handled claims, all in claims, handled claims dealing with personal auto, commercial auto, trucking, transportation, general liability, professional liability. So it's run the gamut of claims that I've handled throughout my career. I'm also a licensed Georgia attorney. So I licensed in the state of Georgia, but all of my experience and career has been working for various carriers in house. Currently, I manage a team of consultants that handle with complex personal and commercial auto claims within the American Family enterprise.
Excellent. And I think, you know, I wanted to speak to somebody in the claims part of our industry, get them on for our audience to listen to because I think a lot of times people, they get kind of intimidated by the claims process. They have insurance policies, and when it comes times to report, they really don't know what to expect. And as an agency, I think we really try hard to be a representative of our client, get involved in the claims process, kind of stand in the middle to make sure things are going well and proceeding as they should. But I thought maybe I'd get, an expert on to talk about that and ways that people can prepare for a claim or what to expect when it happens. So
Mhm.
thanks again, Gwen. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So I wanted to start off and kind of going into that. What is your department? What do your staff? What do you guys look for? What type of documentation when a client gets ready to submit a claim?
Yeah. So any and everything from incident reports to written statements, if you have them. So anything that can be helpful to defend the claim is really what we're hoping to gather early on. As everyone knows, memories fade and things get fuzzy as time goes on. And oftentimes something might happen today, but a claim or a lawsuit doesn't come in for years to come. So really having the documentation and having all of that information, gathering it on the front end is 1,000 times more helpful on the back end when we're having to defend the claim.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that's probably you're talking mostly about liability issues that may come up, having good documentation. What types do you have any particular examples of what people should have on file for their records or things they can keep, for the lifetime of their business operation?
Yeah, so liability as well as just any sort of defect issue that could come up, right? Knowing when you started the project, when you ended the project, just really keeping good documents, a record of what's going on, right? I've seen claims where a particular contractor had finished their piece of the project, something happened, and they're brought into the lawsuit, and they have the documentation to say I was done on January 30th. This happened on February 15th. I wasn't even on site. So really just keeping good records as a for your business in general, not
Yeah,
necessarily in the light of a claim, but just keeping good records in general, I think is key.
absolutely. Yeah, that's we try to we try to tell people that all the time. And we've had when you're talking about property claims, we've had situations where it's really hard. I mean, we have a lot of fires we're in California. We have a lot of fires here,
Hmm.
and you can't always remember what you had, what your inventory consisted of, what
Exactly.
you may have lost in a fire without having proper documentation and records. So not only does it help the adjuster, but it also helps you as the policyholder, to claim and explain what you had at the time of the loss.
Hmm. For sure. For sure.
And do you guys see like those types of property catastrophic? Do you guys deal with catastrophic property losses, or is it mostly on the liability side that you work with?
On my team, it's mostly on the liability side. We do obviously write fire and theft and property type losses, but mostly on the liability side for me.
Cool, cool. Okay, so going further now, um, when a claim happens, what are some considerations people should keep in mind to work with the insurance company to make sure the claim moves along properly?
Yeah. So I think one of the key things to understand is that the claims adjuster is really there to help, right? The Our job as the insurance company is to help the insured in their time of need. And their time of need is when an accident or, something happens. So really just thinking about it from that perspective, and I know everybody's not difficult, everybody's not easy to work with, and sometimes people may feel or insureds may feel like the insurance company is trying to catch them or not to pay their
Yeah.
claim, but really our job is to pay our claims. Our jobs are to find coverage, right? So I think just understanding and trying to build a rapport and a relationship with the adjuster, understanding what they need, what documentations they need, and things of that nature certainly help to go, I think, a long way when filing a claim and getting a claim paid. So gathering all like that documentation we just talked about, gathering all of that together. Figuring out what's the best way to get it to the adjuster. Sometimes that's uploading it. Maybe you're going to meet face to face because they're going to come out to the scene, and maybe it's helpful to bring that so you can go through it, right? Sending someone an email with documents is good, but if you can actually walk through, like, this is what this is what that is with the adjuster, then they can better understand what they're looking at and looking for, and can help to speed up and move the claim along. So those would be, I would say, some of the high level things. Just understanding that their job is to pay your claim and to do right by you, and approaching it from that perspective.
Yeah, that's a great point. And we tell our clients I think there's a misnomer in the industry that carriers try to find ways not to pay claims, and I've been telling people for years that's not the case. In fact, last year, 2021, we tracked every single claim that we knew of that came into our office. Obviously, there's claims that get filed that we don't know about, but the ones that we got involved in, we tracked, and 91% of the claims that we tracked were accepted by the carrier. So, that not might necessarily mean that there's a payout, because sometimes on liability claims, it could mean just defense, but they're still getting defense. They're still getting attorney representation. The carrier's paying for that. They're helping.
Hmm.
And that's a big number. So I think that's a big misnomer. Another thing that you brought up that I want to reiterate to our audience: claims adjusters see a lot of I mean, they see a lot of happenings, and I'm sure some claims fall in line with each other, that they're similar, but no two claims are going to be the same because they don't know exact. So an adjuster needs to take the time. They need to understand what you were doing, what was happening, and that takes help input from the policyholder. They're not going to know off the top of their head, oh yeah, that happened this way, whatever it may be. So
Hmm.
I think that's important to understand. That's why there's a lot of questions. It's not
Yeah,
because they're trying to give you a hard time, but
exactly. Or
am
trying
I
to
right in
catch
that,
you,
Gwen?
right? Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah,
Or trying to catch you, right? We just want to understand, so that way we have the facts, right? We have to line
yeah.
up facts with the policy to make sure that there's coverage and whatnot. So yeah, it's certainly not to catch you or anything like that.
Yeah, exactly. And it's another point you brought up. So the policy, I think people don't realize a lot of times, is that the policy is a contract. The language in the policy dictates the contract between the insurance company and the policyholder.
Yeah.
So we make sure, people, obviously reading a 150-page policy is not a lot of fun for people. And there's a lot of language in there that they may not understand perfectly.
Mhm.
But understanding your policy, at least reading it, going through it, looking at the endorsements, the forms, the exclusions, and the limitations is important.
Correct. Yeah. I would highly recommend that. Or, having someone that can help, whether you have an in-house risk management department, they should be versed in the policies, or some sort of consultant or something of that nature, just to walk you through. And then also all of what you just mentioned, but what your duties are, right? So sometimes we will have a late notice situation, or things of that nature that arise because the insured didn't really understand what they had to do and when they should do it, when they should notify their carrier of certain incidents. So
Early reporting of claims.
yeah.
That brings us right into that. So, yes, Gwen, can you speak a little further on that?
Yeah.
I think people kind of get lost and don't understand that. So,
Correct. I think sometimes people think, and so I've seen it from both ends of the spectrum. Sometimes we have insureds that as soon as an incident happens, they're reporting it, right? But then you have others that are waiting for a lawsuit or waiting for a demand from an attorney or waiting for something to happen before they report the claim. And I would say the earlier reporting, the better, because that allows the carrier to start investigating even if you're not sure if a claim is actually going to arise. So you could report it as notice only. Hey, my
Yep.
insurance company, this thing happened. I don't know if someone's going to make a claim, but I want to put you on notice. So if they do, you already know about it. You may have already gone ahead and investigated. I've had several
Yep.
claims where, for example, in a multifamily community, someone passed away. Someone was deceased in a car. We don't know how they got there, what happened. They went ahead and reported that to us so that we could start investigating. In cases where there's fatalities, we may go ahead and retain counsel just so that we preserve evidence and we go ahead and start that process if a claim were to arise. I've had instances where nothing ever came of it,
Right.
but we felt comfortable that we had done the things we needed to do early on instead of waiting for a claim to come up. Because by that point, it could be, like I said earlier, a year, 2 years down the line. That a claim finally arises and nobody's investigated. All the witnesses and evidence and everything is long gone by then. So being able to really start that investigation early and nothing came of it. We spent, a couple $1,000s to retain counsel to do some preserving of evidence, and then that was it. But at the end of the day,
Yep.
the insured was protected if
Exactly.
something were to come.
See, that's brilliant. Yeah, and I think people, we call it putting the carrier on notice. Maybe not so much reporting a claim, but putting them on
Yep.
notice. So that, like you said, and I think people worry about that kind of with their, making their law, ruining their record, their clean record of claims history. But I tell people all the time, and I'm sure you guys do too. I mean, the insurance carrier is a partner to you.
Hmm.
They assume liability also in these types of situations.
Yep.
So we really need to let them know to protect themselves and you
Hmm.
so that if something does come up later on down the line, don't we have to, it's good practice to let the insurance company know what's going on,
For sure.
regardless of your claims history.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think most, carriers, particularly when I was at my prior company, we would talk a lot to our underwriters about accounts, right? So they would want to know, are they proactively reporting claims? Are they letting us know? So that's a part of the conversation. Not necessarily did we pay, but what's their process look like? Are they documenting? Like, what kind of shop are they keeping? Because that's a part of the risk that the carrier is taking. Because you could have
Absolutely.
a case where there's no liability, but because the documentation and things of that nature
Yep.
are poor, then we end up having to pay because we're not going to be able to adequately defend the
Yep.
insured.
And then, yeah, exactly. Then now their loss runs show a larger payout. Whereas before you said maybe for a couple $1,000s, you get an attorney to preserve the evidence, get ahead of it. And, their
Exactly.
history looks a lot better on that case in that regard than it does with the large payout. So,
Yep. Exactly.
so that's great advice. Thank you, Gwen, for that.
You're
And for
welcome.
our audience, that's key. So keep that in mind. Going on next. So I think you spoke earlier about contractors, and at our agency, we do a lot of work with contractors.
Hmm.
And for many, many years, we've always tried to explain the occurrence form policy, claims triggers, and contractors' liability because it's not always crystal clear.
Yeah.
It's not black and white. There's a lot of gray area when it comes to contractors. So I was wondering if you could maybe give us a couple of examples, or maybe one example, whatever you're comfortable with,
Sure.
of some contractors' liability claims that you've seen where it may not always fall on the policy that you think it could fall on, or it might fall on multiple years or whatever it may be.
Yeah. So the biggest thing to understand with contractors is that it's very jurisdiction specific, right? So it's going to go based on the laws of the state. Some states say that an occurrence or an incident happens when the injury or the property damage manifested. Some say it's when the work was done. And that's when the occurrence took place. So it's very jurisdiction specific as to what the laws are in that state. I did have a case some years back involving a contractor that provided a fire suppression system, and they were using a particular PVC pipe and caulking to put the fire suppression system in. And to their understanding and their engineers, that these two things were compatible. Come to find out that they weren't. And so they put all of these pipe, and this was a large building that they had refurbished. So they didn't create it from scratch, but they remodeled this large building. And um, a few years after they finished the work, the PVC piping and the water started leaking through because the caulking and the PVC piping weren't compatible. And there were actually, the current policy is where my company came in. We insured them for their current year
Mhm.
policy year, but they had coverage for the prior year. And there were some property damage that occurred on the prior year, but then some that came in during our policy. So we actually worked to get, myself and another carrier. It was a large claim. It was multi-million dollars. So there were more than one policy that
Yeah.
came into play, and we worked together to resolve. It was a lot. There was some OSIPs. There was a lot
Oh,
going
wow.
on,
Okay. So there's a lot going
and
on.
there was a lot going on in that particular claim. But that's just a good example of where more than one policy could be triggered. So it's really important, when I talked about before. So going to keep harping on documentation, record keeping, keeping a record, maybe like a spreadsheet or some sort of document that lists all of your policies for the existence of your company, because you never know when you're going to have to go back 10 years. Who was I insured with at that time? Because in that state, it goes back to when I did the work versus when the incident occurred. So just
Yeah.
keeping up with that documentation is so important.
Key. Key. Um, in that case, there was obviously extensive water damage. Sounds
Mhm.
like.
Yep.
Were you was through the examination of the loss, you guys were able to tell at what point the damage occurred? Like some that
Well,
was done earlier, some that that's always
correct.
interests me. Yeah.
Yeah. So what happened was, there was some lapse. So we had one damage that took place, and then later on more damage took place. So
Got
it
it.
was clear. It can get fuzzy, right? Because, and we did have to look through a lot of documents, look through emails and things of that nature, correspondence, to really try to pin down exactly when it first occurred. But
Wow.
yeah.
It's interesting. It really is. And, you know, with that type of loss, obviously the contractor probably didn't expect any of that to happen. So good
No.
that he had, the carriers to work together and make sure that they got it all you guys got it figured out for him. Now, is it normal that I'm sorry, carriers would work together in that type of case and figure out where some of the liability rests with which carrier and to share in the payout or the loss?
Yeah, I think that's normal. I mean, there
Yeah,
are times where we're, on opposite sides, right? We're saying, no, this is yours, no, this is yours, But at the end of the day, at the heart of it, most carriers, in my experience, anybody I've worked for and others that I've worked with, are looking for, how do we protect the insured? And in that particular case, I think it was fuzzy as to when, kind of going back to your question. So we both just agreed, because the loss was so large, we might not never know exactly what date, that we should both just do the right thing and go ahead and pay, the claim on behalf of the insured, because there was a lot of fuzziness into the dates. So, but in my experience, yes, I think carriers do work well together, with the common goal is to protect the insured.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just quick question, little side question. Do you work with subrogation claims?
I don't. I
Okay.
don't.
I'm just wondering how often that would, if they're prevalent or if it's more like some carriers, if they do pay, sometimes if they think there's another carrier that's responsible, if they do subrogate or if they don't, or it depends on the size of the loss or any of that nature.
Yeah, I think all of that it's all going to depend on all those things you mentioned. often if we think another carrier should be involved, we want to get them at the table when we're settling
Yep.
versus trying to go after them
After
later.
the
So
after you settle,
after,
yeah,
yeah.
because that's probably more difficult. Yeah,
Yeah.
got it.
But if we can't, like, let's say they just fold their arms and say, no, we're not paying anything to protect the insured, we're going to do what's right and then fight that battle later on. But to the extent we can all come together and come to an agreement, that's what the preference would be. Just so that it's resolved and,
Yeah,
it's done.
absolutely. Cool, cool. I have a couple more questions.
Yeah.
Then I'll let you get back to your busy day. Any other helpful information that we can pass on to the audience, which is mostly small business owners, uh, that can help them when dealing with a claim
Yeah.
or preparing for a claim?
So this kind of goes back to the documentation, but um if there's witnesses or any sort of people that are involved that are going to help, getting a written statement from them is always helpful. Getting their full name, address, phone number, email, and even social media if you have it. Because oftentimes what happens is people move, right, or they change their phone number, and you can't reach them. But most people, that are on social media, pretty consistent, right? And so it's probably
Right.
not going to change. We'll see as time goes on, but that would be a good thing. And then making sure that everything is kept in a safe place, right? You may have a risk manager today and then they leave and now you have someone else. So making sure that, because I've seen that happen where the owner might say, yeah, I know we kept these things, but I don't know where Mary put them. So making sure that there's some sort
Yep.
of labeling or some sort of way that you're keeping the documents in a safe place so that way you can pull them out a year, years later. um Looking at whether procedures were followed, right? So sometimes something will happen, and because you realize, okay, there's a gap where our contractors or our subcontractors aren't doing this, and going ahead and following up to say, hey guys, remember we have to do this, because sometimes one thing will happen, it won't be a claim, and then it'll happen again or again, and then it's a claim. Whereas had we recognize that procedures weren't followed, or maybe people needed just to be reminded, we could have avoided the second and the third incident that then turned into claims. Um,
Gotcha.
so yeah, so
That
those would
makes
be
sense.
other things that I would say to keep in mind.
Now, when dealing with subcontractors, you mentioned that briefly.
Yeah.
How important is it for proper subcontractor agreements, indemnification language, enforce additional insureds? Does that play a big role in your work and what you
So
guys
I
do?
did a lot of that work about a year ago, when I was at my prior carrier for 5 years. I did a lot of New York contractor,
Oh
New York
yeah,
labor law work.
labor law. Yeah, that's a big
Labor
one.
law, New York labor law. Yes. So it's very important, because if it doesn't, I had many cases where they said, well, we agreed that they were going to indemnify us, but the contract doesn't say that, or it has mutual indemnification. So they're going to indemnify you, you're going to indemnify them, so and at the end of the day, just like the insurance contract, whatever the contract says, that's what goes. Whatever side conversations you had or side agreements,
Yeah.
they're not going to hold any sort of weight or muster. So it's got to
Yep.
be in the contract, making sure that the contract says what the parties intend to happen.
Yeah. The handshake deals don't really work out too well when.
No, can't bring those to court and tell the judge, ask
Yeah.
the judge to enforce the handshakes, unfortunately.
Mm. Yeah. Unfortunately, I know it's well intended. You
Yeah,
have a relationship, but
yeah,
things have to be written. So
exactly.
awesome. And then last question. This is something that I think interests is interesting to know.
Mhm.
Where are you seeing most claims currently? Like, are you seeing any trends in claims right now, or things that people might want to look out for in protecting their business?
Well, particularly in the contractor side, I would say, given the boom in the housing market and things of that nature, just making sure that, your subs and, those that are working with you are doing a really good job. I think there's anticipation that there will be some sort of uptick in construction defect because there's so
Yep.
much construction going on, and there's a labor shortage, right? So finding good people to work is becoming more and more difficult. So that's, I would say, one of the hot topics or things that are being discussed. We haven't seen, and hopefully we won't, right? Knock on wood, we won't
Yep.
see those claims, but we haven't seen them. But that's certainly something that's that's top of mind right now.
Yeah, I could see that, and I think that too, because when contractors get really busy, maybe their work goes a little faster than normal, so you just don't know what's going to come a couple years down the road. But that's a great point. Um, and yeah, labor shortages. It's been tough, but cool. Well, thanks, Gwen. Anything else before we go on that you'd like to leave us with or talk about or at all?
No, I think documentation, documentation, documentation. I can't say it enough.
Yeah,
I just think that it can make or break a case. So making sure that we're doing that well, keeping good records, are the key.
great. Thank you so much. Documentation is very important. Very, very important. So, Gwen, thank you so much. It was a really nice speaking to you. Thanks for your great
Yeah.
information.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, it was awesome. And to our audience, if you have any questions, regarding what we spoke about today, uh, you can reach me directly. My direct phone number is 858-384-1507. Also, Mike at foagency.com. We have lots of helpful resources on our YouTube channel regarding things that Gwen and I spoke about today, claims processes, proper documentation, sub agreements, all that good stuff. So reach out if you have any questions. And if you have any particular questions for Gwen, I'm happy to be a liaison to answer, ask those to her, and I'll get back to you with the answers. So thanks again for watching, Gwen. We hope to see you soon. Thanks again.
All right. Thanks, Mike.